And I give the floor to representative of Russian Federation.
Благодарю вас, господин.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank the Deputy Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria, Ms. Kalamatar, for her briefing. This morning, we already had the opportunity to discuss the humanitarian situation in Syria. We can only reiterate our call to Western donors to renounce double standards when it comes to providing humanitarian assistance. Despite the trend towards a stabilization of the situation in Syria, a large amount of work remains on a number of fronts. The political process demands our utmost attention. Russia remains committed to the principle of a peaceful solution to the Syrian crisis through political and diplomatic means. In the interest of advancing this process, the Constitutional Committee was established under the auspices of the UN, and it began its work on October 30th in Geneva. Its creation was made possible with the critical contribution of the Astana format. We commend Special Envoy Peterson's and his team's approach to creating the conditions that would enable negotiators to develop a culture of dialogue and trust towards one another. This is a very important and inalienable, essential component of success. In Moscow on January 24th, productive and useful meetings were held between the Special Envoy and the Minister of Foreign Affairs Lavrov and Minister of Defense Shoigu. The discussions focused on ways to activate joint work both in Geneva as well as through the Astana format, under which Russia, Turkey, and Iran are cooperating successfully. We expressed our full support to Mr. Peterson's efforts. The visit of Mr. Peterson to Damascus taking place currently also seems quite important to us. There he will have the opportunity to discuss the prospect of holding another session of the Constitutional Committee. Like the Special Envoy, we are not over-dramatizing the fact that a mere month after the establishment of that body, no grandiose results have yet been reached. That is absolutely natural, and we believe that it is counterproductive to over-dramatize the situation and designate guilty parties. We will do everything to assist creating the necessary conditions to progress at the next section of the drafting committee whenever it will be possible to hold it. Mr. President, combating terrorism in Syria is also a priority. One of the last strongholds of terrorism in Syria continues to be Idlib and the civilian peaceful citizens being held hostage there. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham fighters and their subordinates are violating the ceasefire agreements. At the beginning of January, a ceasefire was announced upon the proposal of Russia and Turkey. However, terrorists violate it daily. They attack and use various types of weaponry to shell the Syrian army and civilian facilities, as well as the Russian airbase in Crimea. Of course, such armed provocations cannot remain unanswered. We have long pointed out the need to separate as soon as possible the armed opposition, if it still remains in Idlib, and terrorists. At the same time, we are, of course, concerned by the spread of terrorists from Idlib to other parts of Syria and their penetration into other countries, for example, to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. Would also like to point out the note of the permanent mission of the Syrian Arab Republic to the UN, as well as announcements in the media of terrorist plans to organize yet another round of provocations and stage uses of chemical weapons in Syria. We believe these signals to be very worrying because we know full well how these staged events are used for military and political purposes. Another very important area of work in Syria, which impacts both the political process as well as efforts to improve the humanitarian situation, is the cooperation between Moscow and Ankara when it comes to the implementation of the 22 October memorandum in order to prevent armed clashes in the northeast of the country. The Russian Federation continues to provide assistance in establishing contacts between the Kurds and Damascus and correcting the harm that was caused by the illegal occupation of that area and the dangerous experiment in demographic engineering that was staged there. Mr. President, to conclude, I would briefly like to touch upon the following. Yesterday, Washington published its vision of a Middle East settlement. I won't go into detail because this document requires studying in detail and a separate discussion in the future. However, we were forced to note that there was a serious mistake in the maps in that plan. The Golan Heights were shown as part of Israel. In that connection, we would like to remind those geographers that put together this map that we, as well as Security Council Resolution 497, do not recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. They are Syrian illegally occupied territory. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for his statement.